Lawyers. What were your "this guy isn't winning" cases? Story 1. Friend who is a criminal defense attorney was called at 3-something a.m. by the presiding judge. The sheriff is on his way to arrest your client, who is having his bond revoked. I am calling you at 3 a.m. about that, because he is having his bond revoked for posting a real-name social media threat directed at me and my family. Story 2. Had a client tell me she couldn't be charged with drunk driving because her boyfriend was steering from the passenger seat and she was just working the pedals. Pass that consult onto someone else with no shame. Story 3. I used to work in forensic science and had to testify a lot. One of my co-workers was on his way to testify when he passed by a courtroom that had its door open and heard the attorney screaming at his client, "How can you show up drunk to a DUI trial?" Story 4. I worked for a trial graphics firm and was working on a case where a forklift driver was driving maniacally and ran into a cinder block wall of a new construction. It caused enough damage that a gentleman on a ladder on the second level of the structure fell and fractured some vertebrae. The forklift driver was reprimanded the day prior, driving the forklift in an unsafe manner. In his deposition, he bragged about how many speeding tickets and traffic violations he racked up in his Corvette. It was fun watching the deposition back with the plaintiff's attorney. Story 5. Client sued for injuries from a car accident. He had about 3 or 4 other accidents within the 3 years prior. One of them was a big rollover accident. He had medical treatment for all of them, but he only disclosed the accidents that were not the rollover. Also, insurance companies saw on his Instagram that he went skiing even though he was complaining about pain in his low back that was so bad he couldn't walk. We should never have taken the case. I don't know why the office signed him up. Story 6. Not a lawyer, but was in court to testify. Defendant in another case is pleading guilty. The judge requires him to allocute, and he gives a detailed description of his crime. He finishes, the judge looks at some paperwork and says, "Sir, that's not what you're charged with." Story 7. Child visitation case. Mother argues for less visitation because father is always late also in bringing the child to school and generally unreliable. Father is a whooping 38 minutes late to the hearing. Story 8. The federal judge asked all the attorneys on a civil case into chambers. He stared point blank at defense counsel and said, "The jury hates you. Really, really hates you." Story 9. I saw a defendant pulled in for a show cause for violating probation. His drug test had showed positive for cocaine. He stood up and shouted that it was a false positive because he drank 3 2-liters of Coke that day. His lawyer grabbed him to sit down with one hand while facepalming with the other. Story 10. Not a lawyer, but both defendants, husband and wife, showed up way late, 15 and 30 minutes late. Wife had big mouth and talked her way into judge stating she was utter essence of contempt. Story 11. Jury trial. Client on the stand. We'd gone over this evidence dozens of times before. The date of the service of a document was dispositive for the entire case. Q. What is the office policy regarding issuing this letter to overdue accounts? A. We do it on the 5th of every month. I already was ready to facepalm here because the document is dated the 3rd. Q. Exhibit A is dated the 3rd. Why is that? Hoping she would say the 5th was a Sunday, so we wanted to get it out early. Instead, she said, A. I don't know. It shouldn't be. If the 5th is a Sunday, we are supposed to serve it on the 6th. Double face palm Q. But if you dated it the 3rd and signed the proof of service for the 3rd, that would mean you served it on the 3rd, right? Objection. Leading. Sustained. Absolutely the correct call by OC and Judge Q. When did you serve the document? A. I have no idea. Client charged with rape. His semen was found inside her vaginal canal. He swears it was consensual, but he's already told the police she had only given him a handjob. 2 weeks later, he killed himself. Story 12. NAL. But I felt the need to share my own singular softsit experience. Canadian, by the way. In traffic court. Waiting for my turn. Guy is called. Stands up and is dressed and looks respectable. Business suit. Clean, hair-combed, suitcase. Would have guessed he was a lawyer if he was sitting ahead of the bar. He stands up and says out loud, "Well, I have a driver's license with that name on it, but as it's in capitals, you can see that's the name of a corporation, Your Honor." The justice on the bench did his best to be reasonable with this guy, but the guy immediately starts a speech about how the system is corrupt and there needs to be changes. He would go on about that several times in the next while. This first time, the justice says, "That's not what we are here to discuss today. We're here for a speeding ticket, and if defendant's name doesn't present himself in front of this bar, I'm ruling a conviction in absence." So the defendant hustles in front of the bar, officially presenting himself for the case. Behind the bar is gallery only, and proceeds to start an indignant series of acid-borne arguments that were so bizarre as to verge on schizophrenia. Highlights were trying to invoke papal law, to which the justice responds, "Papal law? This isn't Rome. That doesn't apply here." Defendant tries to quote admiralty law, which perplexes the justice as, "Where do you get admiralty law? This is Alberta. This is the most landlocked province in the country. Where do you get admiralty law?" The defendant replies, straight-faced and serious, Well, there used to be a fountain in the basement, sir. Mind you, defendant hasn't even made his initial plea yet. Multiple times the justice tries to steer him back on track, and the guy keeps responding, well, I did it, but that's not the point. So well after a bailiff has been called to keep an eye on this thing, and I, witnessing this, have finally realized I wasn't dreaming, the justice on the bench finally says, okay, fine, you've said you've done it multiple times before, and I'll accept that as a guilty plea. Hands out fine and 30 days to pay. Next case. Story 13. A man approached the court for a reduction in his child maintenance payments to my client while driving a brand new BMW SUV. He said because I was a junior at the time, he'd handle the case himself and head squash me. After his poor attempt at compiling his disclosure of his financials, he was investigated and it was found that he was laundering money through a fake online church. He's now being criminally prosecuted. Story 14. Obligatory, not a lawyer. But this thread reminds me of the U.S. sovereign citizen who argued that he had a First Amendment right to free speech in a Saskatchewan provincial court. I just knew he wasn't going to win that one. Story 15. Not my case, but happened while I was waiting for my case to be called. Guy was upset the plaintiff was issuing a citation to discover assets against his wife and said in my culture women can't own anything. Judge was not amused. Story 16. Potential client. I want to sue the Hilton for racial discrimination. They refused to let me use the pool because I'm black. Me. Wait, you came down from your room and they told you no? PC. No, I came in from the beach and they said no. Me. Wait, were you staying there? PC. No, but there were white people in the pool and a white guy said I couldn't use it. Another lawyer took the case. Either didn't ask the right questions or didn't care. Story 17. Okay, it wasn't my client, but I was prosecuting a case. DWI third offense, reckless driving, neg use of a firearm not relevant. But the law on that one needs to change. If you're drunk and a cop found you with it in the car, that's enough to convict. 99 of the time, though, our office would dismiss that charge for a DWI plea and assault on a police officer. In our jurisdiction, DWI fourth is a felony, so preliminary hearing required. Those are usually waived since it's pretty clear if PC existed in DWIs, but the defendant is pro-SC and refused to waive. So I finish my questioning of the officer. Defendant requests cross. First question, isn't it true you only added the assault charge because when I hit you, you started crying like a stunned the entire courtroom. Judge told him to watch the language and recommended that he be represented by an attorney since the question was also an admission. Pretty sure he just wanted to do it for the spectacle. He said no further questions. Judge ruled PC existed to continue. He came over to me talking about pleas, and we wrapped that up before the end of the day. Defendant was drunk 80-year-old hitting on the 18-19-year-old jurors during recess, while his lawyer frantically told him to stop and bodily blocked him from groping them in the elevator after he'd cornered one. Story 18. Not a lawyer, but a business acquaintance was being sued over a slip and fall that apparently left this guy permanently disabled and unable to walk. His by-reputation lawyer turned down settlements and was apparently a nightmare in court-ordered mediation. The whole thing fell apart when my acquaintance's lawyer won a hearing over the plaintiff's motion to exclude video evidence from a private investigator. Guess who was recorded multiple times walking and once running in the rain into his lawyer's office? Apparently, the judge ruled in a morning hearing, and the case was dismissed with prejudice before close of business that same day. Story 19. Happened to a friend of mine a few years back in Canada versus TELUS. TELUS offered a promotion on his contract, and he always would call in and say he just wants his original contract price, which was 15 cheaper than what it was worth now. So every year, he would call in and ask if he can extend his contract by another year. Well, last year, as that price was practically non-existent, they immediately bumped his price up when he phoned in, stating that he was on a glitched account and his original contract was newt because they didn't sign a contract every time they extended it, so they charged him over $8,000 for the plan. But what TELUS didn't do, or this rep and this whole department didn't do, is that they should have asked to see the contract he had first, and seen that they did do that, and he has emails, phone calls, dates, and letters and pictures to prove that they did. So he takes TELUS to court, hires a fancy lawyer, and seeks, I think, the maximum in B. See small claims is $40,000. So $40,000 in mental anguish, breach of contract and pressure tactics, and wins. The lawyer warned TELUS and said, hey, I put a lot of evidence into discovery for you guys to comb over. Are you guys sure you want to pursue this? It's a pretty strong case. I highly advise to look at this. TELUS said, no need. We have our proof. Their proof? Original contract that has an end date, and their defense looked super smug and happy. My buddy's proof? All the amended contract emails, agent names, dates, phone call transcripts they got from TELUS, everything. Judge ruled in my buddy's favor, and even made the comment he gave you a chance. Story 20. Client was on trial for murder 1, and OJ's case looked like a plot from Suits compared to this. Nobody has ever been worse at crime in the history of crime. We were appointed counsel, which means we're private employees who sorta offer to be on standby when they run out of public defenders. We were his fifth. He'd fired the four prior because they kept telling him to just get started on the life sentence because this was already over. They were right. My client was on trial because he executed his girlfriend with a pair of gunshots. He did it because she'd secretly aborted a pregnancy that might have been his. He found out when he picked her up at the clinic. As they drove home, both of them live texted their hour of conversation, including all of threats to kill her for this when they got home, which he did. My client's apartment building had recently upgraded to full-color, telescopic 4K security cameras. We think he didn't know the upgrade had closed the blind spots. Looked like film from the Super Bowl. My client was also the only 64 Hispanic man with bright red hair and a taste for rare, designer sneakers that I and his victim had ever met. This makes it difficult to argue it is not him while the prosecution plays his Gotham City highlight reel on a projector. My client not only shot her with his own gun, he brought his phone with him while he drove out to the remote spot where it was found. My client also texted his friend to buy him the next one-way ticket to different country, no questions asked. He made sure to give him his credit card to buy it though, cause we can't leave our homies on the hook for that bill. My client confessed to his parents and offered to turn himself in. Finally, my friend client had to hide his grin under his hand while the victim's family cried on the stand. The jury deliberated for 43 minutes, about halfway through a frivolous order of protection hearing against my client seeking visitation with his son, after the woman admitted she wasn't in danger, and a friend told her filing an order of protection would keep him from getting visitation. As the judge was reaming her out, she blurted out, "I want a lawyer." Story 21 third hand, from a friend of the lawyers, in a divorce case. Tell them I only want the boy, not the girl. If I say that you're not getting custody of either one, I don't care. Your Honor, my client only wants custody of the boy. You can guess how it went. Story 22, order of protection case. Victim filed. Abuser shows up for court in a suit with sunglasses on. I don't have proof of this, but he was a meth addict, so pretty sure he was trying to hide the pinpoint pupils. Abuser decided he is going to exercise his right to hear what he has done and question the victim. Victim gets up on stand and answers his questions honestly. One of the questions was, "Why are you working with the police to put me under surveillance via cameras in my light fixtures?" Victim responded, "There are no cameras. You're on meth and hallucinating." Cue courtroom erupting in laughter, including the court employees. I've never seen a courtroom get so loud in real life and watch the judge start yelling for quiet and banging the gavel. Victim was terrified she had done something wrong and kept apologizing to the judge. At the end, the judge granted the longest oath possible via the state, then excused the victim and family. As victim was walking out, the judge laid into the abuser and then some about how much of a disgrace he was to the community and how his parents and grandparents were rolling over in their grave. He should be ashamed of himself. The judge continued this until they determined the victim had time to get in their vehicle and leave. Story 23. Couple neglectfully allowed their pet ferrets to maul their very young child while they slowly warmed a bottle as the baby screamed for help. Permanent damage to child's feet and ankles. Ferrets were put down by animal control. Parents wanted to sue animal control over the animals and also try to get their homeowner's insurance to pay the medical bills. The first case ever assigned to me. Story 24. My dad was a corporate attorney who occasionally tried cases. His worst experience was representing a racist property manager. The plaintiff was a black nun who was so distressed by the situation that she lost large clumps of hair. My dad had to question her while she cried on the stand with visible bald spots. He felt absolutely horrible and his client lost. Story 25. This is rather boring compared to other stories. It was a child custody case in a county I don't normally practice in. Mom, my client, wouldn't agree to a rather good settlement agreement and wanted her way 100. She wanted a judge to decide, rather than the parties settling where they both walk away winning and losing in a sense. The hearing starts, and the judge enters. We all rise like you typically do, and the judge unleashes a tirade telling us to sit down. It's obvious we're from the big city all dressed up, but it's his courtroom and he's in charge. Then the judge mentioned his military service, and I knew that minute we weren't going to win this case. The dad was formal military. I pissed the judge off by not taking the time to know how he operates his courtroom before appearing in it. Judge ordered a dad favorable opinion. Mom was mad. I learned two valuable lessons. The first is that settlement is preferred because you at least have some control over the outcome. And the second is get to know the court you are in. Edit most civil court cases are legally nearly 50-50. Both parties have legal standing to present their version of events and proposed remedies based on legally sound arguments. There's only a hair of legal difference between the two sides. Having a professional relationship with the judge and county bar association can be the difference between winning and losing a case. If there's not much to go on, the judge is going to side with the one person they know because it becomes about character and trusting a lawyer's candor at that point. It's just a reality. Story 26. I was the defendant, not the lawyer. But I'll make this quick. If you're going to try to sue for an excess of 100,000 for life-changing injuries over a tiny no-damage fender, no bender, maybe don't leave your social media public. And if you do, maybe don't upload pictures and video of yourself rock climbing, hiking, and going to extreme trampoline parks. And for the record, they got nothing. They should have settled with the insurer. They'd have gotten 10K to go away. Story 27. I'm not a lawyer, but my mother-in-law's divorce attorney would have a great answer to this. My father-in-law started to suffer from early onset dementia, which triggered a series of events resulting in my mother-in-law not wrongly filing for divorce. Throughout the 3 years of divorce proceedings, my father-in-law's condition became very obvious, to the point he was showing up to court in garbage bags when his lawyer was able to get him there. By the end of the divorce, he was living in a memory care facility, which was about as close to on earth as you'd imagine, and his sister had power of attorney. When everything was settled, their estate was split 50-50. Yet my mother-in-law insisted he was faking it, and that he had hidden millions on offshore accounts. So she sued. She couldn't prove he ever had millions of dollars on the first place. She insisted he was faking it, despite several doctors and attesting to his condition. So pretty much all of the proceedings were she's not winning. But she insisted. When their divorce proceedings were finalized, she had over 750K. By the time her failed attempt to sue ended, she was down to 125K. Story 28. My mom's client lost his case because he kept posting his workout videos and pics to Facebook after his car accident. He just would not stop and I think was addicted. Apparently showing off his physique was more important than his case. My mom had to tell another client not to post vacation pics of her on a dune buggy in Dubai after her accident, and she was majorly pissed off for it. Baffling, really. Story 29. Literally, any sovereign citizen judges won't put up with it. Also, anyone who abuses the kindness of a judge. If a judge gives you a chance to get rid of your case predisposition, take it. Because you won't get many of those, and those are way less serious than a criminal conviction. Story 30. One of my wife's very old cases. DV, where the male partner was accused of assaulting the woman. Defense was, well, yes, she was pregnant, and I hit her in the belly, but it wasn't with an iron bar. The judge was not amused. Story 31. My sister is a lawyer, and her client ran a stop sign and T-boned another vehicle. She told my sister that she just knew in her heart of hearts that the other vehicle would stop instead. Was actually shocked that it didn't. Story 32. Someone posts the video of that one defendant who struts in, sits down and yells, "Guilty as charged," and then gets checked by the judge. That's gotta take the cake here. Haha. Story 33. Clients in jail awaiting trial for an unrelated charge. Client decides he wants out of there and stacks chairs in the rec room. Client climbs chairs, pushes through the ceiling tile, then crawls on top of ceiling toward the next room over. Client falls through the ceiling 5 feet from the starting point and plummets 10 feet in a shower of ceiling tiles. Client somehow manages to land on his feet. Client grabs fallen ceiling tiles, stacks them on top of chair stack, then attempts to escape again. Client falls through a different part of the ceiling. All of this is captured on jail video camera. Story 34. I'm not a lawyer, but I've seen several clips of the trial of Darrell Brooks. He drove his car through the Waukesha Christmas Parade in 2021, killing 6 and injuring over 60. Throughout the entire trial in which he represented himself, he did nothing but dig his own grave while irritating everyone else in the courtroom. The judge absolutely threw the book at him, ultimately imposing 6 life sentences and an additional 1,000-ish years with no chance for parole. Story 35. Not a lawyer, but I used to sell advertising to attorney. I was walking into an attorney meeting when he pulled me aside and said, "We'd need to reschedule as he has a bit of a complication going on." I asked him what that was and he said, "Well, my client brought his girlfriend to his divorce meeting with his wife." And I went, "All right, Lee, you have fun with that one," and wished him and left. Story 36. I'm a public defender. Where do I start? Had a resisting an officer case that was actually a good trial case. Unfortunately, there were certain facts we needed that could only come in through my client, so it was the very rare instance where the client needed to testify. During cross-examination, he randomly blurted out at the jury, the entirely rural white jury of conservative blue-collar paper mill workers. I thought I was going to get George Floyded. Read a room he could not. Had a client get pulled over for driving at night without his headlights on. Officer gave him a warning, and then let him go. And then in passing, while turning to go back to his squad car, asked, "Oh, you don't have anything illegal in your car, right?" His response? "Nah, you can search it if you want. Pro tip, if you give the cops permission to search your car, they're gonna search your car." Shocker. Found open containers. 0. 27 BAC. I have so many. Story 37. My squad was searching a stash house on a warrant. This is part of a takedown of a violent organization, and there were a bunch of houses being searched at the same time. The house I was in was a known stash for guns and drugs, And during our investigation, we bought multiple guns which came out of this house. I was searching the kitchen in full kit when someone opened the back door and popped their head in. I turned around. He looked at me. I looked at him. Then he backed out and slammed the door shut. I ran to the door, opened it, and he was standing right there with his hands up. I sat him down on the patio steps and started to get his information while my SGT ran him through NCIC. The guy was cooperative but wide-eyed and nervous AF. As I stood there and began to look at his waistline, I could see a clear outline of a gun in his jacket pocket. My BWC footage showed what was almost textbook printing of the gun while I stood in front of him. He didn't fight, he just accepted getting cuffed and arrested. Possession of a handgun by a prohibited person. He went to booking, and after getting into the jail, he made a phone call. Keep in mind that the phone system very clearly says all conversations are monitored and recorded. During this phone call, he told the other party that he had a satchel with 700 cash and coke that he tossed over the fence before I came out the back door. A couple detectives went over there and found the bag. There was a big snowfall that morning. There were no footsteps anywhere near the bag. The bag did not have any snow on top of it. Inside the bag was 700 cash, cocaine, and the guy's driver's license. Dude filed a motion to suppress. His position was that I had no right to detain him. He lost that motion pretty badly and plead out. Our state's attorney cited something like 7 clearly established cases, which showed that this position was comically wrong at best. At the end of the hearing, the judge told the guy he was going to put him in an employment education program because he needed to find a new job because he was so terrible at being a drug dealer. Story 38. I'm not an attorney, but I work for the state equivalent of the IRS. My job is to resolve tax disputes before trial, and if they go to trial, I am the state's primary witness. This means I'm subject to cross-examination by the other side, typically the taxpayer. I was dealing with a difficult, agitated, aggressive taxpayer for an extended period of time. This is common before trial. We try not to go to trial, so there was a prolonged period of me trying to explain why we did what we did. I had some brutal trial prep with our attorneys to get me ready for anticipated cross-examination. To reiterate, I work for the state equivalent of the IRS, the IRS being a federal agency. I gave my testimony. Then the taxpayer was allowed to cross-examine me. He asked me why the IRS disallowed his refund. I explained for about the 5th time, I do not work for the IRS, and I do not know why the IRS did what they did. He would need to ask the IRS. I was tempted to comment that if the IRS also disallowed his refund, it would appear the state side adjustment was also correct, since we follow federal law. I decided against it. Next, he said, no further questions. Going to trial is expensive. Both sides had to split the costs for the court stenographer, $1,400 so $700 each. During the lead up to the trial, I told him multiple times we are not the IRS. Dude literally paid $700 to ask me under oath if I worked for the IRS, because apparently my telling him multiple times that I do not, and all of our correspondences being on my state's letterhead was not good enough for him. I think he may have had some brutal follow-up questions for the IRS, and he was completely blindsided by this revelation. IDK. The amount at issue was about $3,000, so $700 was a hefty amount for the taxpayer. Of course he lost. We knew we were probably going to win before trial, but when he declined to even ask me any questions which could advance his case, it was clearly over. Edit minor grammar. Story 39. I've had quite a few doing Social Security disability. Typically speaking, it's people who have gone back to work and didn't tell me, or that all of the sudden remember they actually volunteer 40 hours a week once they're under oath. But the most memorable one was the guy who was being questioned by the judge about his marijuana usage, which was noted in his records. And after being asked if he used any other drugs, starts listing off meth, heroin, coke, etc. Pretty much you name it. He'd done it, and then informed us all that he had last used about a month prior. That was a denial I didn't appeal, and a real interesting call with his mom when she called me super pissed about him getting denied and me recommending not to appeal it. The judge had actually done him a solid and completely left out all of the hardcore drug use in the decision, so it wouldn't be an issue for him in the future if he got clean and tried again. But that made his mom think that the judge had clearly denied him based on bullshit, as he had only mentioned the alcohol and weed. Story 40. Not a lawyer, but this one always make me chuckle. A friend of mine rear-ended another vehicle. They exchanged info. There didn't seem to be any damage or injury, and they went on their way. 2 years later, my friend receives word that she's being sued for injuries from the accident. The other party had a sprained wrist and was suing for $25,000 for pain, suffering, loss of wages, etc. So my friend calls her insurance company and they say they'll take care of it. Long story shorter, insurance company offers her $5,000 for her to go away. She insists her injuries deserve better compensation. They offer her $7,500. She still refuses. They offer her $12,500. She laughs and says, "See you in court." And they did. About a year later, case went before a jury. She won and was awarded $2,300, 1/3 of which had to go to the lawyer she'd hired. So, Instead of taking 12,500 of which she would have gotten 100, she went to trial and ended up getting 66 of 2,300, so about 1,500, and had to wait a whole other year to get it. Yeah, that's a win. Story 41. I was defending the case, so it wasn't my client, but the guy testified very clearly, under oath, multiple times, in no way that could be mistaken that he was seen by a very reputable specialist who diagnosed him with an irreversible condition that was a key issue in the case. We ended up settling for nothing more than nuisance value, nearly pocket change, but I was holding in my pocket until trial in case I needed it, that the reputable doctor had died several months before he evaluated this guy. That would have been a fun one to try. Story 42. I had a client walk into the DCS Family Services office and demand to be drug tested immediately. They tested positive for almost everything. Still can't figure out what they were hoping to achieve. Story 43. One client showed up to court wearing the same outfit he wore during the robbery caught on camera, crystal clear. When we pointed it out, he said, "It's my lucky hoodie." I knew right then he was not winning. Story 44. Friend of mine's does defense against injury claims for companies, currently working on where the guy tried to kick a moving train, lost his leg, and currently suing the train company for damages. Whole thing's on camera. Story 45. Attorney filed a motion asking to excuse client's previous default due to the conduct of client's previous counsel. Unfortunately, the movement was also client's previous counsel. Story 46. Not a lawyer, but I was in a 5-Memaminov car accident. Bumper-to-bumper traffic, rush hour, everyone just inching up every 39 seconds or so. The genius next to me pulled into my lane, his passenger rear tire made contact with my driver's side front tire. Pulled into a fast food place to wait for police BCZ. He insisted on a police report. 1 week later, I get the news that he says I pulled into his lane. He has a litany of injuries. I was absolutely livid. He was lying, trying to game the system. I went on a mission to learn everything I could about him and discovered that he fancied himself a personal trainer. Amazingly, he was holding a group session at a public park the very next weekend. Now, I live in Florida, which does not allow recording without consent unless you're in a public place. I set up at a park bench that same weekend and recorded his dumb for 5 hours. Pull-ups, push-ups, ropes, throwing a giant medicine ball. Dude was definitely in shape. I sent the video to my insurance company and told them not to pay a dime. They told him to pound sand and we all lived happily ever after. Story 47. When I clerked for a trial judge, we had a divorce case where the wife was asking for way more than the standard calculation for maintenance alimony would have allowed her. She showed up to her trial date dressed in head-to-toe designer clothing with a designer purse. She lost. Afterward, the judge told me if she wanted to claim she was so bad off financially, she should have left the pearls and Prada at home. Story 48. Late to the party, but IAAL who ended up on jury duty. Gotta love when both sides use up all their strikes before they get to you during voir dire. Sat on a criminal case. It was a late-night, early-morning purse snatching. Guy stole the purse from women just as a cop was driving by. And there was a line of sight on the defendant for all but 30 seconds. And there was also blood evidence from when he cut his hand while jumping a fence, leading to a 99.9 certainty. The defense's full argument was that the person who stole the purse was wearing a shirt, and his client, when arrested, was shirtless. Keep in mind, there was a shirt found along the direct path of pursuit. I get that you've got to hang your hat on whatever you can to defend your clients, so I respect the effort. That being said, when the prosecution entered into evidence a statement of the defendant asking the police, "Can I have my shirt back?" you could hear the facepalms from miles away. So glad I practiced transactional law. Story 49. Not a lawyer, but work in the courthouse. Had a civil trial with judge and jury, which is super rare for us because who wants the unpredictability of a jury in a motor vehicle collision? There was a car accident. He sustained injuries to his back, his spine, his neck, his head, his tailbone, and about 3 other ways of describing back pain. He hadn't initiated the action until a year later, because a lot of his symptoms were late onset. Then, on the stand while testifying, he admitted something to the effect of, "I wasn't going to bother with suing, but the cost of living crisis has gotten out of hand. I'd like to buy a house and real estate prices are crazy high, so I'd like the money." Surprise, surprise, this did not sway the jury who had to give up 2 weeks of their lives for this guy's stupid trial. He lost. So on top of his financial worries, he was on the hook for the other guy's legal fees. Story 50. Of federal criminal cases, 91 end in conviction, and 8 are dismissed before getting significantly underway. Most of the time, this guy ain't winning is the default. Occasionally, prosecutorial overreach happens, but it's rare. They don't want to waste their time or make themselves look bad. When they go to court, typically it's because they know they'll win. So, almost everybody isn't winning. Story 51. I am currently in litigation. The fact that the defendant has changed lawyers 4 times over the last 2 years, with 2 of them entering a motion to withdrawal, tells me everything I need to know. Story 52. It was a civil case when I worked for a housing association. Basically, we owned a cul-de-sac and pretty much had every resident complaining about one resident in particular. Unfortunately, they weren't of the highest character and/or were friends with this problem resident. We also suspected this person was a drug dealer of some sort, but that case was still building, so we couldn't use it. Our star witness was a former doctor who had just moved as it was one of the few available bungalows we had, and even they, with no previous knowledge, had made a complaint about them. Sadly, they were having chemotherapy treatment when the case was being brought to court, so we had very little to go on. We had a lawyer who looked green as grass and basically just said to us, well, say we are still expecting star witness to arrive, they have an appointment they couldn't move, and basically just act confidently and poker face it. We went into court. Their lawyer also looked green as grass as well. Our lawyer explained our side and our witness wasn't present yet. Their lawyer stood up and started his side and carried on talking about all different laws and protections his client had, our obligations as a housing association. The judge just shut him down. Don't be lecturing me on what the law is. I've done this far longer than you have. Their lawyer sheepishly sat down. We talked a little about the case for a couple of minutes. Their lawyer stood up again and said, if our witness doesn't appear in X amount of time, then we must continue on without them. Judge cut in again more harshly. Yes, I am aware of how things work in a court. Be seated now. And wait, or make your plead. Now, they lost their bottle and asked for the case to be ended. The problem tenant would accept responsibility, and an agreement worked out between them and the housing association. It wasn't the client who lost them the case. It was the lawyer who couldn't shut up and lost the silence confidence. Edit spelling mistake.